kids! I'm Miss Melissa. Welcome to Kids Church. I'm so glad you're here today. Well, I got a message saying that we needed a lot of bricks for a special building project in Kids Church this weekend. We've already heard about how Solomon built the temple and about how the captives returned home and built it again. So I don't know. My message said that Nehemiah needs lots of building supplies though, so I'm gathering them now. Stick around and we'll find out what Nehemiah is building. Think about a time you were really sad. We've all had times that make us feel really sad, right? Well, today we're going to learn about a time when Nehemiah was really sad, but also about how he did something that was really hard and how he became happy. This seems like a good time for toilet paper roll theater. Our story starts back in the land of Persia and takes place after some of the Jews had gone back to Jerusalem with Zerubbabel, and also after Ezra had returned to Jerusalem, like we learned about last week. Today, we're going to be talking about a guy named Nehemiah. Nehemiah was the king's cupbearer. Now, that means that he would be the one to get the king a drink, but even more important than that, he would be the one to taste the drink to make sure it wasn't poisoned. He was a special, trusted servant of the king. Nehemiah was also a Jew, but his family had chosen to stay in Persia when some of the other captives had gone back to Israel with Zerubbabel and Ezra. Nehemiah's brother Hanani comes for a visit. Nehemiah asks him, "How are things going in Jerusalem?" Hanani looks sad. "Not well," he says. "The walls around Jerusalem have been torn down. The gates have all been burned. The city is unprotected." Nehemiah sank into a chair and dropped his head. For days Nehemiah mourned. He fasted and prayed. "Oh Lord," he pleaded, "I am going to ask the king for a great favor. Please put it in his heart to be kind to me." Nehemiah waited for the right time. One evening, Nehemiah carried the king's wine to him as usual. The king looked up. "Why do you look so sad tonight?" he asked. "I am sad because I found out that the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins. The wall has been torn down. The gates have been burned." "How can I help?" the king asked kindly. Nehemiah prayed a quick prayer. Then he asked the king, "If you are pleased with me, your servant, please send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried." Not only did the king say that Nehemiah could go, he said yes to Nehemiah's request for a letter to the manager of the king's forest. "Could he give me wood so that I can build the city gates and the walls and a house for myself?" Nehemiah had asked. And the king also ordered army officers and soldiers on horseback to go with Nehemiah and protect him on the long journey to Jerusalem. "Bye, King!" Nehemiah finally reached Jerusalem, and after staying there for 3 days, he rode his donkey all around the city at night to see the damage. He found he couldn't even ride through some of the places because of all the rubble that had fallen from the wall. The next day, Nehemiah spoke to the city leaders. He told them how God had helped him so far. "Let's rebuild the walls of Jerusalem," he exclaimed. So the people began to work. And they worked hard. But their enemies did not want God's people to build their protective wall again. "What do these people think? They can't build this wall. This wall's gonna collapse even if a fox walked across it." But the Jewish people kept building. The enemies made plans to attack the Jews, but the Jewish people prayed to God for protection. Then Nehemiah told them to get their weapons and to guard the wall with one hand and work with the other. So they continued building, even though they had to build while they held their weapons. "Don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord," Nehemiah encouraged them. Many times the enemies tried to stop them from their work and to discourage them from rebuilding the wall. But Nehemiah prayed constantly, and God gave them the courage and wisdom to continue. And the wall that would help protect Jerusalem again was finished in just 52 days. Hooray! Nehemiah wasn't a builder, and he had lots of people and circumstances that made his situation harder. But Nehemiah trusted God for wisdom and kept his focus on God through it all. We have things in our lives that distract us from God, that might discourage us, maybe things we don't know how to do. We can ask God for help and for wisdom. And just as God helped Nehemiah, He will help you too.
Let's sing the New Testament. Let's sing the New Testament. Let's sing the New Testament. 1, 2, 3, 4. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd and 3rd John, Jude and Revelation. These are the books of the New Testament. Let's sing the New Testament. Let's sing the New Testament. Let's sing the New Testament. 1, 2, 3, 4. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd and 3rd John, Jude and Revelation. These are the books of the New Testament.
Hey everyone, I'm glad you're here. Hey, what's your favorite thing to draw? I like to draw pizza and puppies and my family. But I have a really big family, so they're kind of hard to draw. Have you ever made something that was really hard to make? Well, in today's story, we'll meet a guy named Nehemiah who wanted to make something that was really hard to make. It wasn't a drawing, but let me tell you what it was. Nehemiah was from a city called Jerusalem, but he lived far away. When our story begins, Nehemiah was sad. He'd just heard from his brother that his hometown was in trouble. The people in Jerusalem didn't follow God like they used to, and the walls surrounding their city were falling down. This was hard news for Nehemiah to hear. He trusted God, but he didn't understand why the city he loved was crumbling like that. So Nehemiah went to the king he worked for and asked for permission to go home and lead his people in rebuilding Jerusalem. The king said, "Go!" and even gave Nehemiah help in making the long journey ahead of him. Rebuilding the walls was a big job. In fact, even though Nehemiah knew God wanted him to lead his people, he wasn't sure how to get it done. But Nehemiah trusted God. He said, "Okay, God, if this is going to happen, you'll have to tell me what to do next." And guess what? God heard Nehemiah's prayers and showed him what to do. Even when people doubted if Nehemiah knew what he was doing, he knew God was right there, helping him every time he had a question. Just like Nehemiah went to God when he wasn't sure what to do, we can ask God our questions too.
together. James 1:5. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and He will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. Here's some of our friends saying the verse.
James 1:5. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and He will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. James 1:5. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and He will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking.
God's story, Nehemiah. So part of God's story is about a guy named Nehemiah, and it goes like this. Remember God's family? They were called the Israelites because they lived in, you guessed it, Israel. But some of them lived far away from their home, and one of those guys was Nehemiah. He lived in Persia and worked for the king. One day, his brother told him that a city in Israel called Jerusalem was suffering, and many people there weren't following God anymore, and their city wasn't in very good shape. Nehemiah cried, "God, you are wonderful, but your family's home is in trouble. Please help us. When I serve the king his wine today, make him pleased with me and have him do what I ask." Later, when Nehemiah served the king's wine, the king noticed that Nehemiah looked sad. So the king asked why. Nehemiah told him about Jerusalem and asked if he could go back to rebuild the wall. The king could have killed Nehemiah for asking to leave, but instead, he said go. He even helped. That's because God heard Nehemiah's prayer and answered it. Anyway, Nehemiah went to work rebuilding the wall, but little did he know he was going to need to ask for a lot more help from God. See, God and his family have always had enemies, and these enemies wanted to stop Nehemiah and the people helping him. First, they made fun of them. So Nehemiah prayed again. He said, "God, some people hate us. Please get rid of them," and went back to work. Now, God does hear and answer every prayer, but sometimes not in the way we expect or even in the way we want. And at first, it seemed like God wasn't answering this one at all, because when the enemy saw that Nehemiah was still building, they planned an attack. But Nehemiah trusted that God heard his prayer even if it didn't feel like it. And God did! He caused some people to overhear the enemy's plan and warn Nehemiah. Even though the enemies were still after him, Nehemiah planned a defense and told the others, "Don't be afraid of your enemies. Remember the Lord. He is great and powerful." And on they worked, building, building, building. The closer the wall got to being finished, the more Nehemiah's enemies realized they couldn't stop him by making fun of him or by attacking him. Time for something else. They tried everything. They sent messages to get Nehemiah to leave the wall and meet them. He wouldn't. They hoped Nehemiah's hands would get weak, but Nehemiah had asked God to make his hands stronger. They even paid a priest to ask Nehemiah to leave the wall and come to the temple. But Nehemiah trusted God more than anyone else, even the priest, and he refused to stop doing the job God had given him. Kids, are you willing to listen to God and obey him, no matter what? Well, finally, the wall was done. God's family got to go home again, and Nehemiah's enemies found that nothing stops God's plans. The Israelites celebrated and praised God, and as they praised, they realized how much their sins had hurt God, and they felt terrible. They told God they were sorry and thanked him for helping them. Then they made a brand new promise to follow him, and Jerusalem was once again a safe place where people honored God. And that's the story of Nehemiah. But just so you know, there's another story where God fixes something that's broken. See, one day, God would send a very special rescuer, not to save a wall, but to save the world. He made it possible for not just Israelites, but everyone in the whole world to confess their sin to God, thank Him for His rescue, and follow Him. And just like that old wall was made new back then, our old lives can be made new right now, because Jesus has rescued us. And that's a part of God's story.
Well, hello there, you little chicken nuggets. It's me, Carl.
And I'm Cassie. Welcome to Grow TV.
Welcome.
Welcome to Grow TV. Introducing your host, Carl. And your co-host, Cassie. Where we learn, where we grow, and we talk about Jesus. Once again, welcome to Grow TV.
So Carl, how are you doing today?
Not doing too bad. I have a lot on my mind today.
Really? What do you mean?
I don't know if you know this about me, Cassie, but I am an intellectual. Intellectual.
An intellectual? Really?
I am a person of vast intelligence. My brain is so big that it's puzzled multiple doctors. Hundreds, actually. Hundreds.
I'm sure it has.
So I was sitting at home with my enormous brain, and I wrote down some questions I think we should discuss and ponder over. Converse, if you will.
Do you really feel like this is the best use of our time?
Too late! The copyright-free classical music is already playing in the background. How much deeper would the ocean be if sponges didn't live in there? Why doesn't glue stick to the inside of a bottle? Why do we drive on parkways and park on driveways? If a cow laughed, would milk come out of its nose? Why do skydivers wear helmets? Why does your nose run and your feet smell? Why don't your lips touch when you say the word touch, but they touch when you say the word separate?
Wow, that was...
Remarkable, life-changing, thought-provoking.
I was gonna say interesting, but sure.
I get it, Cassie. You're jealous of my ginormous brain and the questions it has created.
I don't know if that's true. Besides, those were good questions, but kind of silly.
Silly?
Yeah, did you have any more?
Well, sure, but I don't know about them.
Can I look?
Sure, I guess.
What's my purpose? What does it mean to live a good life? How can I learn to forgive? Wow, Carl, these are really good questions.
You think?
Of course, I think these are questions you should be asking God.
Wait, I can ask God questions?
Of course, have you never done that?
I don't think I have.
Well, let me tell you this, God would love to hear you ask those questions.
Really?
Yeah, and you never know. They might be answered in really cool ways, like Nehemiah.
What?
Nehemiah, from the Old Testament.
Oh, Nehemiah. I remember that story, but for the people watching who don't, how do you say, remember the story, how about you give like a brief recap for them, not for me, because I know it.
Okay, Carl. Well, a long time ago, there was a king, and the cupbearer of the king was named Nehemiah. And the walls of Nehemiah's hometown, Jerusalem, were broken down. They were in shambles.
What? That's awful. I mean, I knew that already.
It really was. Now, Nehemiah cared about his hometown so much that he prayed to God that he could return and help build the wall back.
Now that's a big question. Not only did he have to be the cupbearer to the king, but building a wall would be like a ton of work.
It would, but it meant a lot to Nehemiah, so he knew that he had to ask God about it. Once Nehemiah was around the king knew something was wrong and knew that Nehemiah wanted to ask him something. So the king asked Nehemiah what was on his mind.
Did he tell the king about his desires to go back to Jerusalem?
He did, but first he prayed to God about it. It was important to him that he asked God first, and then he asked the king.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
It was. It was even cooler that the king said yes. He was going to let Nehemiah go back and help build the wall.
No way, that's great. All because he just asked the question.
Yep, but it only worked out because Nehemiah asked God the question first. So God was actually with Nehemiah when he asked the king.
Well, I guess that answers one of my questions.
Which one was that?
Well, I've been wondering how I'm going to get answers to all my questions. And I never thought about asking God, but I will now.
That's great to hear, Carl. I'm glad you know now that we can ask God our questions.
Well, hot dog! That's our big idea!
Today's big idea is we can ask God our questions.
That's right. And on the count of 3, let's all say it together. 1,
2,
3. We can ask God our questions! We can! And God will answer. In one way or another. Right? Yes.
So what are you going to do with that big list of questions, Carl?
Well, I'm going to keep them, and I'm going to ask God the questions. Hopefully I can get some answers.
I bet you will. Maybe to even some of those silly ones.
Well, there you go again. There's nothing silly about this question. What cheese is the moon made out of?
Oh, I thought you already knew. The moon is made out of mozzarella.
Wait, what?
Bye, everyone.
We can eat the moon? It's made of cheese.
Thank you for watching, and tune in next week for a new episode of Pro TV.
Let's pray together. Dear God, thank you that we can come to you when we have questions, when we need help, and when we are discouraged. You are the one that gives us wisdom and strength. Help us today to learn what you want us to learn. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for being with me today, guys. I'll see you back here next week. Bye.